Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Kissing. How weird is it that we just mash our faces together instead of using our words? Let's dim the lights and get frisky.
Welcome, everybody, to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Alphabet City. Catch a ride with the hottest new action film in town. See Alphabet City in theaters now. Welcome, everyone, to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And we're filmmakers. We like to analyze and study film and get better at making things and also appreciating things. Here's what we think based on what we saw, not based on the director's commentary. And if so, we usually call that stuff out. I try to always call out if I got an idea or a thought from somewhere else, but we largely try to keep everything to our own ideas. This is our own conversation about a film we just watched. And so, yeah, with that, what film did we just see with our eye holes?
We saw Perfect Sense, I think from 2011 when this was made. So if you haven't seen this film, please pause the episode and go watch it because we're going to spoil all the things.
Yeah, we'll dive into many things, I think. We'll talk about some of the cinematography, talk about contrast. We'll talk about camera moves that elicit an idea. And of course, we'll talk about some of the story and writing. We'll talk about scene character, something we've never really discussed before, as well as relationship epidemics and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. A chef and a scientist fall in love as an epidemic begins to rob people of their sensory perceptions. It's directed by David Mackenzie, screenplay by Fupz Aakeson, cinematography by Giles Nuttgens, featuring Ewan McGregor as Michael, Eva Green as Susan, Ewen Bremner as James the sous chef, and Dillane as Stephen the researcher.
Stephen Dillane?
Dillane? Oh, and Stephen Dillane as Stephen the researcher.
My sister's got 2 kids, and sometimes I hate them. I can't have children. My ovaries are crippled. My eggs are no good. Because of not eating. I pretend that I'm not that into them, that I have an interesting job. Anyway, I can't have them. Your turn.
I had a girlfriend.
You don't get this game, do you?
No, I had a wedding planned. And she got sick. She got really sick. You could smell that there was something wrong inside her, like something damp, something from a basement. I didn't stay with her. I didn't look after her, I ran away. I make myself go and visit her grave. At first it was once a week, and then maybe it was once a month, and now less. And go there to feel guilty, you know. I thought I would feel guilty for the rest of my life, but actually it's starting to fade.
So, Todd, you've never seen, possibly never heard of this movie. What did you make of it, man?
Well, yeah, I'd never even heard of it, and so I didn't know what to expect. I even forgot last week when you mentioned it had something to do with an epidemic. I forgot about that. So, we were a couple of minutes in, and I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm getting into. This is like obviously like a somewhat of a maybe a drama. I don't know. Like when people are kind of like sulky walking along slowly, I'm like, okay, kind of like figuring out what I'm getting into, how you normally do. I love Eva Green, and I mean, she's amazing in everything she does. And I love her voiceover. she's just fantastic in it. And so, it opening with that was really cool, giving us a little bit. And then I remember, obviously she's a scientist, and she walks in to see that guy, and they're talking about him losing his sense of smell. And I thought, when was this made? Well, first off, I thought, oh yeah, epidemic. And then I was like, when was this? Oh my God, this was almost 10 years before COVID, and just unbelievable. And I didn't know where it was going. And so when I realized, oh, they're going to start losing all their senses, I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And I thought it was really cool to marry a relationship with fading and losing other senses, right? So you lose a sense and other senses are heightened because of it, right? Your body has more energy and more dedication to pay attention to your hearing if you lose your sight, or to your smell if you lose your hearing, like things like that. And they address that in this. And so other thing, and it was really cool because you get to see, or they paint this picture of society finding a way to continue, right? But then the end is so gut-wrenchingly beautiful. And I, when it ended, I thought, man, how do you function? Like, everyone would die. Like, how do you function? You can't see, you can't smell, you can't taste, you can't hear. All you have is touch. And if you lose contact with that person, how do you get contact with that person again? There's, I mean, you have your sense of feeling, but maybe that leaves you too. Who knows? It's like, maybe you can stomp on the floor and like find somebody that way, but how do you find food? And so it was almost an end of the world. Not almost, it was definitely an end of the world scenario. And I was sat there laying there after the movie ended thinking, what the hell would I do? I that would be incredible, because at least in their scenario, it's just them, right? But imagine if you have to like take care of your family, you have to like find food for your children, and like, what they're going through. Can you imagine the terror that kids would go through? I started imagining the entire world going through this. People in planes, their pilots lose their sight in mid-flight, it was crazy in what went through my head. But that was after the reaction that I had of them seeing each other, walking toward each other as they're losing their sight, because that whole scenario of him running to her and her running to him was so beautiful, and they were almost missing each other. And then she pulls up behind him, and I'm screaming at not physically, but I'm emotionally screaming at him to turn around. She's behind you. She's behind you. It was so beautiful. And I also love the concept of when you're about to lose a sense, something else gets super heightened. They get really hungry before, I think they lose their taste, right? Or they like everything looks so beautiful before they lose their sight. And it just is extreme, almost like it's a fury of that heightened sense before it goes away.
It's kind of like when you're hearing, when you lose a hertz or frequency in your hearing, and you hear that swan song of the hearing. It's like ding.
Yeah,
it's gone.
tinnitus.
Yeah, or not tinnitus, just like the frequency says its last moment, and you never hear that frequency again.
Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, it was absolutely beautiful, and their performances are amazing. Ewan McGregor, this might be one of my favorite roles that he's done that I can think of. I loved him in Big Fish, and I love him in a lot of stuff that he does. Not all of it, but a lot of it. But this one felt real. I'm glad you showed that clip. That was an incredible moment between them, and the way that he delivers his I guess you could call it a monologue. It's pretty short, but his honesty to her is so real, and it's full of shame, but it's also with this air of trust that he has with her, which I think is super important. Like that moment is really important for them, for us to know what each other means to each other, right? I'm going to give you the worst of me and see if at the end you want to be with him, right? So at the end, they're running to each other. Like, you know, it doesn't matter that he abandoned his girlfriend when she was sick. It doesn't matter that she can't have children and she hates kids, or she hates her sister's kids. That none of that matters, because they just want to be with each other no matter what in the end. I think it's really beautiful. And without that moment, you know, you just have this couple that's, I mean, not necessarily just, but it really heightens their love for each other. And it also breaks your heart later when he destroys his apartment and yells terrible things to her and everything, and she leaves. You know, it's just it also heightens the complexity of human beings and human emotion in general, and how sometimes it's just you can't control it, you know. So anyway, I thought it was absolutely brilliantly written and brilliantly acted. There were a few moments where I thought, like, man, the camera work, like, dude, you couldn't steady that out, you know, like, but I didn't, it didn't bother me. It was just, the rest of the movie felt really, you know, even when it was handheld, felt really like together, but there were a few moments where it was just obviously very handheld anyway, but that's nothing to complain about. I absolutely loved it. I could watch it again now. I mean, I love pandemic movies. I love end of the world movies. I think that they're really entertaining and also thought provoking. For me, you know, I sit there and I wonder, what would I do? How would I survive? You know, how would I, keep my family alive? Like, where would I go? And then it's really, you know, the creativity of the writer, you know, how can we do this a way that nobody else has done it before? And I thought that this was really a genius way that I'd never seen before. So, it's a great movie. I adored it.
Dude, that's so cool. Yeah, I was telling you before we rolled, like, this is one of my favorite this is at the top of my hidden gems whenever I'm recommending movies to people, like, because that's the fun. I mean, we all enjoy sharing something that we love with other people. That's, you know, kind of a given and a strangely universal thing, right? Like this thing that I had nothing to do with. Perfect sense. But I love recommending it and sharing this experience with other people, because no one's heard of it. No one's watched it, you know, and yet it's got two incredible actors, Ewan McGregor and Eva Green. Oh my God. And then it's still in the supporting cast is amazing. Ewen Bremner, Stephen Dillane, or Dillane. We have no idea. But everyone knows him from Game of Thrones, right? He's the other Baratheon. And it's so good. Like I everything you said, absolutely true. Like it's a new approach to a new inroad to a pandemic and to the end of the world. And for me, what I really love is just, it's this deep well of emotion. And I love when someone can tap into that in a way that doesn't feel perverse, or like, I don't like tragedy porn. Like that is not fun to me because it feels like you're just being manipulated. Like, how bad can we make you feel? You know what, F off. Like, that's not what I'm here for. I want you to give me an honest emotion, not just, put a character through the ringer for the sake of making me feel bad and trying to get me to cry. Like that's kind of perverse to me. Whereas this feels like we're really diving into two people's psyches, and then also getting glimpses of the world at large. Like, it seems to me like it's talking on a couple of different levels. And for me, that's part of the fun of revisiting this thing is, what do I think is being said? What's the metaphor in place here? Because it's obviously playing on the surface level of this is how the world ends. And that's really interesting, even on its own. If none of these metaphors, whatever, and that's, one of the things that makes metaphors really fun is if you can just make it interesting on its own, that's cool. And it's functioning now as a story, that's really fun. And then if you can start inserting all these other ideas, that you can layer into it, like, it seems to me to be making a statement on the world at large and how we interact with each other and how we treat each other. And I love, when the rage hits, that's my favorite, because obviously they're using real footage. I'm assuming they went to like Reuters or something and was just like, hey, can we buy some footage, license some stuff from you guys? Because some of those fights are just too real. But what I love about that specifically is they go deaf. After you experience this rage, you go deaf. And I just think that's such a beautiful metaphor for how anger and lashing out and rage makes you deaf to hear anyone else, including yourself. It quiets your own ability to hear yourself. And that's such a profound idea of the way you treat other people. And the minute you start screaming and yelling, how could you possibly, be sensitive or let anything else in? And that's such a wonderful, powerful visual metaphor that they're playing with there. And I just think it's amazing, because when we see Michael's rage in that moment, what does he do? I love how we enter that moment to begin with. Like, before we know he's lost and that he's entering rage, we're entering this beautiful moment through her eyes, through Susan's eyes. She's in the bathroom and she's experiencing something that she's always wanted, and she'd given up on guys, like they're all assholes, right? That's kind of the motto between her and her sister. But her sister's, pushing back. They can't all be assholes, And then she enters this kitchen and she's, hugging him from behind, and we're framing him out. We're focused on her until we reveal that he's gone. Like, he's entering this rage. And what does he use? Every personal, intimate thing that she shared with him. He's using it against her. And that just destroys their relationship. And that's, man, isn't that the truth of how we treat each other? It's like, we're not saying the nicest things, right? We're trying to make everyone else feel as badly as we can about themselves. It's not about how we feel about you. It's all about, how can I make you hate yourself? And that's the real destructive element of anger and hatred. It's not really there to help me at all. It's only there to hurt you. And that's the real disgusting, disturbing thing about, that idea of hatred, is it's outward. It's never inward.
And he says all those terrible things. It's not like he's just like destroying stuff. He says terrible things and then loses his voice, right?
Or
right?
hearing.
That's before he loses, or his hearing.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's funny because I saw something one time about some guy said that and I'm not going to quote him because I don't remember the quote, but something about like being in a hurry. Being in a hurry means that you're cut off from the rest of the world. And I'm paraphrasing.
Wow.
Because then, you can't see anything around you. You can't even see yourself.
Wow.
You only see a destination. And so you're not in the present moment, and you can't love. So actually being in a hurry is an absence of love. And every morning when I try to get my kids to school, I try to remember that. This is a nightmare.
Some days better than others, I'm sure.
Yeah, right. Even with them, I try to make sure to remember, try not to be in a hurry. Anyway, it just reminded me of that.
Wow.
Keep going, please.
Yeah. And so, there's so much that I think this movie is trying to say about that. And I think it's also using relationships as a metaphor within all these, symptoms, right? Losing your sight, losing your hearing, all these things. I think it's playing with the idea of, I don't know. I'll say what I think, but it's like a million things. I don't have one think, like a bunch of things, because I'm not entirely clear. And this is the fun for revisiting, is because every time I watch it, I have a different thought or a different line of dialogue pops out as part of playing with this idea, which is, they're both getting over someone, right? When we meet her, she is, throwing rocks, and that is very much a part of her process for getting over someone. And that's something that her sister invokes later on whenever she breaks up with Michael after his rage. And her sister writes on the notepad, right, like, you want to go throw rocks? And they share a laugh, and she appreciates her sister seeing her. And that's a really beautiful moment. But, you know, when we meet her, she's been missing work. Like, she's not sick. She's just unhappy. That's what she tells, I don't know, her coworker. It's not clear if he's a boss or not, but they're certainly colleagues. And that's what she tells him. He's like, I'm surprised to see you. She's like, aren't you going to ask why I've been out? He was like, I just thought you were sick. She's like, nope, not sick, just unhappy. And so she's processing getting over someone. And so is he. But they're two really different experiences. Because when we meet him, he's waking up with some naked girl in his bed and he kicks her out, right? He gently wakes her up. How do you feel about going home? Like, I just fell asleep. Like, what? Yeah. And he's like, yeah, I can't really sleep with anyone else in bed with me. I'm sorry. You know, it doesn't. Really,
I had to watch that a couple of times because I wasn't sure if it was her.
I bet you did, Todd.
That's not why. I just mean I wasn't sure if it was her. I was like, that can't be her, right?
No, yeah, no.
Anyway.
But one of the things visually I love about that scene is the camera stays on him and she's on the edge of the frame. She's not super in focus. She's just kind of floating around the edge. And I love that because we're not pulling her into the story. So let's not introduce her or focus on her so as not to make her feel significant to the story we're telling, right? Because she's not significant to his story. And so if you don't want the audience thinking that this character's coming back and we're going to see more of her, don't. And this sucks as an actor. Like, for her, this might have been like a big breakthrough moment. Like, oh, finally, I've been auditioning for 6 months. I haven't gotten anything. I booked this gig. And then she gets in, she sees the final edit and she's like, all that's really in here is my boobs. Like, what the hell, man? But in reality, like, that's a great directorial choice because this is about telling your story as well as you can make it. It's not about helping an actor on their journey per se. It's just about making sure you're telling your story. And part of that is making sure the audience doesn't feel like she fits in this world because she's disposable to him. And when we go back to the kitchen, his sous chef, James, is giving Michael all kinds of a hard time, right? About dumping that girl. And I love how it's intermixed with, you know, their work in the kitchen. They're calling out orders and giving direction while also having this side conversation about dumping that girl. And James is so pissed. He's like, girls don't want to screw the nice guy. They want to screw the asshole. And then he gives them this little bit of curse. One day you'll be in love and you'll be miserable. That's your karma. To be truly in love and miserable. And so I think that plays into this idea of the epidemic creating misery. But it's also, I think, playing with this idea of getting over someone and falling in love. It's all this kind of isolating misery that we experience. You know, maybe it's a loneliness epidemic, and that's the metaphor. Or maybe it's this feeling that you can never really connect with someone. Or maybe it's this feeling of falling in love and how much the world fades away when you're truly in love. It's like nothing else exists except for this person in your arms. Or maybe the end is all about breaking up and finding a moment to be okay with breaking up, right? Because she talks about how mammoths, right? Like the world is ending, and she is like, we used to think that mammoths, you know, or whenever the Ice Age came, it came gradually. But then we found these mammoths and they still had undigested food. And that is a clear indicator that they didn't die very slowly. It happened immediately because it only takes hours to digest something. And maybe in some parts of the animal kingdom, like a few days. But either way, it's very, very quick, relatively speaking, that you didn't finish processing your food. And that's when she says, that's how darkness descends on the world. But first, the shining moments, this euphoria, a profound appreciation for what it means to be alive, to offer warmth and understanding, acceptance, forgiveness, and love. And so to me, this could go so many different directions. It could be about processing a breakup. It could be about finally allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to feel love and to accept someone's faults. And so it's really interesting because that's when the lights go out, and that's when we see in our mind's eye that they're holding each other, as she describes it, right? It's dark now. They kiss and they feel each other's tears on their cheeks. They would look like normal lovers to someone if there were anyone to witness it. Eyes closed, oblivious to the world around them, because that is how life goes on, like that. And that's really interesting. And I think that's why this is really about breaking up and moving on, because of the first frame, last frame. If you play the opening scene again, this is what you'll find, is you open on pitch black in the same way that we end it. And let's watch that, because I find it very, very interesting.
There is darkness. There is light. There are men and women. There's food. There are restaurants. Disease. There's work. Traffic. The days as we know them. The world as we imagine the world.
So it's really interesting to think about that as the ending instead of the actual ending, because it feels like a loop. And she's talking about starting over again. You know, there's darkness, and then there's light, and then you begin to live again. You begin to find your way in the world again, even though it feels absurd. You know, and she doesn't say there's the world that we see. She said there's the world we imagine. And so I think it's playing into the same idea of we're moving on, and it feels stupid. It feels dumb to move on in this world without love and while you're aching and hurt, and yet there's still people going about their day. There's people who are moving on. And I think she also reflects on this whenever the end is happening. She's like, there's two kinds of people. There's the people who show up every day and continue on, soldiers who report to work. But then there's the other people who just take everything they can, and all they see is the end. You know, and that's kind of describing the way, you know, anyone could move on from. Like, there's him and then there's her, right? He's kind of that person who only sees the end. That's how he's treating women, as something to take and then dispose of. And that's how she's living her life. She's reporting the work, even though, you know, her world is shattered, whether that's because, you know, she's not in a relationship anymore and she's getting over that, or whether she just found out, you know, she can't have kids. And that's part of her process. It's a really interesting, beautiful, and there's so many ways to interpret it. And that's why I love this movie so much. I wouldn't say there is a right way, even though the author, the screenwriter, I'm sure has her version, and I bet the director has his version, and I bet they're not the same thing. Oh, and I just think it's wonderful. Yeah,
and how about the music then?
God,
I mean,
that motif destroys me.
Absolutely gut-wrenchingly beautiful. I would love to do something like this for a film. To like make something like this for a film. I think I could make this kind of stuff all day, because I just would love to listen to that on repeat all day long. It's so beautiful. It's just like a piano maybe a pad and violin. Like, it's like basically it. It's so simple and yet effective. And when it comes back throughout the film, you're just brought into it. It's so beautiful. And I love how I was wondering how they were going to handle everything after everybody loses their hearing. And I think they handled it perfectly. I mean, you have to have a lot of silence, but also, like, you can't have complete silence for the rest of the film, right? Yeah. So they get you kind of used to not hearing anything. And then I watched it on headphones. I watch everything on headphones, basically. And if you watch it on headphones, you really get a good sense of when they start bringing the tiniest little sound in.
Yeah.
It's
like this very deep, bassy, just sliding in.
It's so beautiful, so well handled. So yeah.
And you're absolutely right, though. Like, but the music is so important to how you're processing this story, because there's another version where it's not beautiful music, where it's scary music.
Yep.
That's a different movie. It's a different story. But here, they're not focusing on the world dying away. They're focusing on what they're losing out in the process of the world dying away. Their story feeling incomplete if they don't find each other. And it's true. Like, whether they're getting back together or saying goodbye, either way, their story is incomplete if they don't come together and have that one last moment holding each other and crying with each other. Yeah. Oh. The other cool thing I really love is he goes to the graveyard to see his ex, and they don't tell us what's happening there, but we see her parents, and we're like, wait, who are? Okay, so he's not visiting his parents, because we just kind of assume in that moment that that's his parents, and they're like, she loved flowers. I'm like, wait, what's happening? And then, of course, that scene we played, he reveals that not only here's what's happening. I lost someone in the worst way possible, and I was the worst person possible for that scenario. I'm the worst. But then there's two moments that happen in that scene. One is the camera is floating around, and if you watch that, play it back, from earlier, you'll watch the camera's floating around, and what he says there is that he's having a hard time still feeling guilty. He thought he would never stop feeling guilty, and then he suddenly doesn't feel guilty anymore. It's starting to fade. And when he says that, the camera stops moving as we just sit. And it's such a beautiful moment because he's feeling less guilty because of her. And now we can really settle in, and you understand that emotionally he's not talking about like that he doesn't feel bad over what happened. He's saying that he's feeling her change him and how he's processing his past. He no longer is processing his past. He's moved on, and now he's with her, and she's changing his world. It's such a beautiful way to use camera movement and to stop using camera movement to let the audience feel what he's feeling. Because now that we're not moving, we can see him watching her, and then we'll cut to the reverse angle of watching and looking at her, and we just emotionally we understand. It's not something he has to say in the dialogue. It's something that we get to engage with. This movie is full of that, full of letting us engage with the story. And that's just so wonderful, because so many movies don't, and it's getting worse as we go. Movies are getting worse at letting you engage with it, instead spelling everything out. This isn't spoon feeding anymore. This is like tube feeding. they just they're putting the thing down your throat and just pumping in the food, and it's disgusting, because how much more moving is it when you get to just understand and be a human being, watching other human beings. But the other thing that I love that happens after that is she experiences her moment of paranoia, which I think could be another element of falling in love, right? This sickening feeling of fear and terror of being vulnerable to someone else. And what I think is interesting is Susan eats a bouquet of flowers. And I think that's a reflection of him and the flowers that he didn't bring to the grave. And it's kind of echoing
Wow.
this idea that, those flowers are for her and she's consuming this thing that was meant for another person. His grief, his guilt is gone. And she took that away in the same way that she's taking away these flowers. I think that's a interesting idea. I couldn't tell you how.
That is absolutely brilliant that you saw that. I think that's totally it. I mean, why else would that random lady be walking past her and be carrying flowers? Why?
So cool.
There's no, everything that happens on screen in a film like this is with intention,
Yeah.
and whether you notice it or not. And I love that little homage. I know for a fact if we were to ask the director, he'd be like, yeah, that's what we did. That's brilliant that you saw that. Wow.
So cool. And how visceral is watching all these people eat all this disgusting stuff. That's
I mean, film is an editor's medium, 100%. And the editing on that scene is just otherworldly. Like, you need to see everything, but you need to feel, and you need to feel like grossed out. And there are a few shots, everything cuts pretty quickly, but there are a few shots where they hang on. Like when the sous chef is drinking the oil, he's just like on the ground drinking oil.
That's
for like
the worst.
5
For me,
or
that's
6 straight.
the most disgusting moment of that whole sequence because he is
That's why, totally.
going for it.
I was sitting there watching it thinking, that can't be actual oil. Or maybe it is, but they have like a spigot on it, so only a little's coming out because you can see it coming out of his mouth. Maybe he's not actually drinking. I don't know. Movie magic has to be happening there because, oh my God, it is revolting. But the editing for that is just fantastic. I mean, the editing for the whole movie is fantastic, I feel like. They hang on certain things when they need to. And the directing and the cinematography is fantastic. I know I called out some shots are kind of wobbly, but I think that has a meaning too. And I think that's important that was there. But yeah, oh my gosh.
Absolutely. I love this kind of cinematography for a lot of reasons. One, it's just visually interesting to me. The contrast, this is so high contrast. Like the shadows are usually crushed, deep into the black. The highlights are often blown out, not always, but often blown out. And it just feels so strong. Everything in this movie feels so strongly. That's a very emotional, evocative way to make your film. And I know so many filmmakers who would balk at doing that because a lot of that's committing on set. Especially in 2011, they were probably committing pretty hardcore. This is digital, and digital doesn't hold together very well in this kind of lighting condition, even now to a large degree. But 2011, I'm sure the codecs were not nearly as good.
Right.
And this is probably compressed. I don't know, maybe not. There's probably still ability to get raw and unprocessed, but it's just, I love it so much. It creates such a visceral, emotional reaction in the viewer, in me. And I love that. I also love the chaotic camera work. To me, that's a part of feeling visceral and feeling like this is real, like you're being inserted into this world. Like whenever he's riding his bike and off the ferry and it's just jumping, like it's just popping all over the place. And for me, that's so much fun that, again, so many modern cinematographers would be like, not on your life. You're not ruining my image. And there's so many times when, we're pushing in on something that's to the edge of the frame. And that's very, not best practices when it comes to a push in. And I just love it. It makes me, again, engage with the film. I have to fight for what I'm looking at. And I have to search the frame a little bit. What's important? What's significant here? And that's just so much fun to me. And it's asking a lot of the viewer. And I think that pays off on an emotional level. And I adore it, for sure. And so many shots are just silhouettes and highlights, just a little tiny highlight giving you a little bit of shape. Like there's that shot towards the end whenever he throws the whiskey bottle at her window and it breaks off the paneling, and you can't even see, he is a white boy and you can't see him you can only see his jacket. Like, that's a choice. That's a bold freaking choice, man.
That's a choice.
And I love it. Like, that's so cool. So many filmmakers would never in a million years do that. And I'm here for it. Because I think the attitude is generally like, oh, you're not taking care of your image, you know, if you want to create a little more. And it's like, man, just let people go to your story a little bit. And this movie is just full of that kind of stuff. The other thing that I'm trying to hack my writing process lately. And so part of that for me is reading and doing this stuff that I don't really love doing, which is studying writing. Like, I've kind of gotten over that. But lately I'm like, I think part of my process, this is what helps me in the gym, like get to the gym 5-6 days a week, is reading and staying up on research. Cause now it's like, oh, I want to try that. And it just makes me a little excited about going and working out because I have a new idea. And maybe I'm seeing, you know, some hot dude come across my feed, and it's like, yeah, I need to hit the gym because, you know, I'm sitting at 20% and I need to get down to 10. It's like, it's a motivation, right? It creates this internal motivation that gets you to want to do something. So writing, it's like, okay, maybe I can hack my writing that way because sometimes I don't feel like doing it, and it's not about your feelings, it's about getting it done. And so studying like writing techniques, and I have been kind of going back through old articles on my favorite website, wordplayer.com. And I read this article about titled like scene character. And I was like, oh yeah, what was this article about? And so I read through it. It's a very simple idea, which is in combat, these guys, Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, are big on plot. Like, they're very plot driven writers where every moment like dominoes into the next moment, instead of some movies, not necessarily, that are just like, we're going to experience this emotion or something. But scene character isn't about creating a situation with an arc or any of that kind of stuff. It's not about giving your character something to do. It's like, the general idea that he got across is every character in your movie has a character, like character traits that are like, I don't know what makes Han Solo, but I know Han Solo when I see him. I know when he's in a scene, he's like, he's a bit of a jerk, you know, but he's also not necessarily one to abandon his friends. And like, you have all these, you say Han Solo and it creates a feeling, and it's like, you may not be able to spell it out, but you feel a certain way when you say Han, just like you feel a certain way when you say Luke Skywalker, like those Yoda, right? These all create a feeling, and you just know their character. And his point was, your scene should have some character. Like, it should feel like a thing. Even if, you know, they're not doing anything important, the scene should feel like something. It should have some character of its own. It should live on its own. And I was like, okay. And so I just decided to watch Perfect Sense with that idea in mind. And on my second, I watched it last night, then I watched it again this morning. And last night while I was watching, I was like, there are hella smoke scenes. Like, there's just like, he got the cancer by the end of this movie based on how much he was smoking the entire time. And so I just wanted to study the smoke scenes, because if you're going to do the same act, you know, 5, 6, 7 times, what is going to differentiate all these scenes? What is the character of these scenes? Because it can't just be smoking. Because if smoking is the character, then you just kind of, it becomes redone and it feels unimportant the second time. And so how do you make each smoking scene have its own flavor, its own character? And so I just want to talk through the smoking scenes. As silly as that's going to sound, let's see what makes these scenes come alive. His first smoke, which is really interesting, it's towards the beginning of the film, of course. And he gets into work, he gets off the ferry, he rides his bike, and he gets to the back alley, you know, where they spend their breaks, and he sees the owner. He walks up, and before he even walks up to the owner's already holding out the cigarette. And he takes a hit, doesn't say a word, he just takes a hit, and he guesses. He's like, Lebanon? It's like, Morocco. He's like, Morocco. And then they go to work. And that's really cool because they're enjoying the flavor of a cigarette. These are chefs, right? And that's part of and you get a sense of who they are and their relationship. Like this laid back thing, and you also get a sense of them being like in the restaurant business because it's about the flavor and like almost like they're sommeliers for tobacco. There's a ton of character just in that one little exchange. That's really cool. And so, okay, what about the next time? He goes out, I'm out of cigarettes. And this is where he asks Susan, while she's on the phone, screaming at her from down below, hey, you got a cigarette? She's like, I'm on the phone. And she throws him a cigarette. You got a light? And do you want room and board while you're at it? And he's like, I don't know you well enough for that. And he's like, it's a really kind of charming like joke because he's over here bumming stuff off of her, and then being like, hey, I don't know you well enough to live with you. And that's really cool. So the character of that scene is clearly that it's an excuse to meet the love interest. It's their meet cute, so to speak. And okay, what about the next time? The next time I think, and I didn't probably keep perfect track of this, but the next time I remembered was him leaving her apartment. He leaves her apartment that first night that they're together and they don't have sex. Right? This is after they both had their moment of the smell disappearing, right? And they're grieving. And it was interesting because he's leaving her apartment, and I think he realizes he can't smell. That was whenever he lights a cigarette and something dawns on him. But what's interesting about that scene too is he didn't have sex, and yet he slept well with her next to him in bed. That's a big moment. So there's a lot of stuff occurring to him in that little moment. He's smoking, but at the same time, there is a lot of character to that scene because there is something emotionally happening there. And it just none of it feels like he's just smoking, even though technically in the scene, he's just smoking. Okay, what about the next time? It's with James and the owner outside. They're having a smoke break, and we're listening to James, the sous chef, his own little conspiracy theory he's spouting. Right? And he's going on about big soap and whatever else.
Big soap.
Big soap. And I love it. And what's actually happening in that scene, though, is Michael is watching her window, right? And I think that's really interesting because we're hearing kind of what's being said, but all the attention and focus is on Michael trying to catch a glimpse of her in the window. Because this is after they've had sex. And she kicked him out of bed. This thing that he was used to being done to him is suddenly giving him a little bit of that misery that James was, cursing him with. And I love this because it would have been easy to write that scene with just him by himself in the alley, right? In isolation, watching her window. And that probably would have came through just a little bit clearer. And yet, there's another emotion that you get out of watching him laugh and joke with his friends and his coworkers, and yet his mind is somewhere else. We can feel a little bit of his isolation and yearning with that context that you couldn't have gotten with him just being out there. Because even though he's surrounded by his friends, he's really not present. He's somewhere else. And that's a layered, interesting idea. And them being out there with him also gives the scene character and gives it a little bit more interest while also building out the world, because it's right after that scene when we cut to another voiceover and she's talking about conspiracy theories and the way the world is shifting around, the loss of everything that's going on. Smell. Okay. And then I think the last one that I have was waiting for her in the tunnel, right? He's just waiting for her after, is this after the taste has gone out? And she has had her apartment like blocked off. Like the residents are all being kicked out. And so he's waiting to take her home and offer her a place to stay. And he's just waiting for her in the tunnel. And this is really interesting. They give this scene a lot of character. It could have just been him waiting and she pulls up and they go in and that's cool. Instead, they expand the scale and scope of the world a little bit more by having, in that same tunnel, this government official in like this hazmat suit waiting. And then we have in the foreground someone running by in this chaotic fashion. So you get a sense of the world starting to slip away. And he's just there smoking a cigarette, waiting for her. That would have been easy enough to write. But doing it in that way, because they also could have had him waiting upstairs or, I don't know, somewhere else. But they chose this location and filled out the world just with these little hints of, here, the world is going to hell, and here's how you can tell. People aren't even, people are masking up, sure, but then some people are going next level and completely covering up in hazmat suits. There's fear. You feel the fear in the world and how nothing is the same anymore. And so I just think it's really interesting to take a very mundane idea of smoking and to add so much around it that you're continually building out the story. And so for me as a writer, I'm taking a lot away from this idea of scene character.
That's brilliant that you noticed that. I totally didn't. I need to watch it again. And this film is so rewatchable. I just think that you learn something every single time you would watch it. And I've only seen it once, but I really think if I watched it again, I would learn a lot more from it. Like, especially after this conversation about the smoking. Everything needs to happen for a reason in a scene. There shouldn't be any superfluous stuff like, why is that person in the background? No, that person needs to be there, for one reason or another, to make it seem like there's more people in the area or something. And something as simple as smoking, especially if it happens multiple times, for it to be part of the story or to develop the story is just a great use of an action.
Yeah.
Right. So that we don't feel, whether we know it or not, or notice it or not, like the flowers, right?
Yeah.
Didn't notice that, but whether you notice it or not, you feel it, you feel there's some kind of connection. And I just think that that's a brilliant aspect of filmmaking, that when things don't need to be explained to you, but when you have a conversation about it and then things come to light, or you look at something in a different way, it's such a great medium for that kind of thing. So brilliant spot there.
Absolutely. And it's just tight writing. Like, this is a 93-minute movie with no waste.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant. And there's how I was just floored, because at first, some of these cutaways to other countries, I was like, oh, you could outsource this stock footage kind of thing. And then the more on rewatch, I was like, I think they just grabbed the director and the DP and just went overseas and like, yeah, we'll spend, $5-10 going to India, going to Africa, and we'll pay some actors to come out and perform a couple sequences. And suddenly your epidemic feels like a pandemic. It suddenly feels like this is the entire world falling apart. And that was one of those mind-blowing things of like, man, if you want to create some scale in your universe, it's not that hard to do, and do it on a budget, creatively. I was floored. I was like, man, that's a brilliant idea.
Particularly in the eating scenes, like the mass eating scenes, like it looked like Africa maybe that they were in, with all those people were gathered around that basket and they were just thrown. And then you see the guy taking his shirt off after they kind of like come to and they realize that what they've been doing, like, oh man, it felt really particular for this kind of thing, like something like that. You don't really see that. You don't really have that in B-roll footage that you can buy, you kind of have to make that, I think. So
yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Great point. Point.
So yeah, I'm really impressed on every level with this movie, between the writing, the acting, the directing, the cinematography. For me, this is all the scoring, like this is all clicking. It's just, it's painfully wonderful to me and aspirational for sure. If I could make something half as good as this, brother, we would be doing good.
Yes, you will.
Yeah, we will. What a great, and I'm so grateful to Ewan McGregor and Eva Green, because this movie, I don't think it works without them. They're so good together, and easy to watch. And it's a delicate balance of knowing when to go over the top, knowing when to pull back, and all these nuanced emotions that they're going through. Eating bar soap, I really hope that was a prop. Like, that was
has to be. Oh, maybe not.
Maybe not, man. Ugh. But yeah, I freaking adore this movie so much. And great use of voiceover. That's a tricky thing to do, and I think most of the movies we've covered have always done a great job of using voiceover. That's for a reason. It's because we generally pick movies that we enjoy. But it's harder than it looks. If you read a script and it's got voiceover, it'll make you second guess because it can be such a lazy, sloppy thing. But here it conveys so much, and they don't spend too much time. And it might sound silly considering we spend, a third of the movie in it, but yet they convey so much and they use it just, I don't know, so wonderfully. Yeah, dude, I'm still, this holds up. I was worried after last week's episode, but it holds up for me. Yeah, final thoughts, man?
Just absolutely adore it. I think it's gut-wrenching and rewatchable. So that's a dangerous combination, honestly.
Oh, concurred. Nice. What are you going to recommend this week?
This week, Jenny actually found a show that we've been kind of binging that I like a lot. I think is a lot of fun. It's called, and I think it's streaming on HBO or no, Netflix. I'm not sure. It's called AP Bio. It's it's with one of the guys from Always Sunny. I forget his name. Who basically plays a similar guy. Which honestly is the only guy he could ever play. But it's fantastic writing. It's a lot of fun. It's like crass in some ways, but also just hilarious. And my wife loves it because she's been a teacher for 18 years. And so the way that he's a substitute teacher and the way that he handles his class is just hilarious. So yeah, AP Bio.
Nicely done. Damn.
Have you been watching that?
Oh, I watched. Yeah, I ran through that whole thing a few months ago.
Okay.
So good.
Cool. Okay.
I don't know where you're at, but every episode, right, starts with, hurry up and shut up, or what is it?
Yeah, he walks into the class and he throws something at the trash can and he says, everybody shut up in some different way.
Yeah, start shutting up.
Which is her favorite part of the whole show.
Oh, one of my favorites. I don't know if you've gotten it. Doesn't really spoil anything, but he's like, and everyone watch yourselves because I am in a mood. And he's like,
could have been any episode.
It really could have been. It fits every time. Nice. I'm going to recommend a foreign film. It's called Life is Beautiful. And I just remember really loving it. Maybe it's still not as good, but I want to say it's an Italian movie. And yeah, it'll make you feel some kind of way about the world. And so why not? Cool. So stay tuned for next week. We'll be covering a new movie coming out with Rami Malek called The Amateur. So hopefully, it's solid. We'll see. Is this another spy thriller movie that we're doing? I'm just realizing
it is. Yeah, it is. But one of the reasons I want to see it is because it's kind of a news story, and I want to support news stories that come out in the theater, because there's so many remakes and everything, and that's fine when I feel like it needs it, but these days give me a reason to go to a theater for a news story so that we can tell Hollywood, this is the kind of stuff we want you to make. It doesn't have to be the best story in the world. It just needs to be new. Give us a new perspective on even an old story, which is I think this film where he's not a real spy, but he has to do something. He has to act like a spy, like for some reason. So yeah, it's a spy movie, but it's with a twist on it, which I think is interesting. And it's Rami Malek, so he's fantastic. So hopefully it lives up to what I'm hoping.
Dude, well said. Don't forget, subscribe if you're not already. Drop us a review if you'd like, and leave us a note if there's something you want us to talk about or cover. And if you want to leave a note on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/perfectsense.
And our quote of the day is from Sylvia Plath. Yes, there is joy, fulfillment, and companionship, but the loneliness of the soul and its appalling self-consciousness is horrible and overpowering. Whoa.
Yeah.
That's, man.
Yeah.
You've been reading Sylvia Plath lately?
She's on my to-do docket.
You okay?
I've read some of her. Yeah, you okay, bro?
You okay? No, I mean, I agree. I get it. Yeah.
She's amazing. One of the greatest writers ever, of course. There's nothing to add to that. If that doesn't, for me anyway, like, feel free to expound or reflect.
No, I think I'm just gonna leave that for the listeners or the viewers to just have their own thoughts with that.
No.
The existence of the self-conscious. Interesting.
Oof.
Beautiful.
Yes,
Beautiful.
indeed.
Well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Hopefully you got a little bit from this episode, and that you've gone and watched this film, because it is absolutely fantastic, and I had a great time talking about it. Make sure to join us next week when we're covering The Amateur, and subscribe, review us wherever you get your podcasts. It all helps a lot, and share us with your friends. And if there's a film you'd like to see us talk about, pick apart, give our opinions on, we'd love to hear from you. Maybe one day we'll do it. Until next time, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.